Korean Fairy Tale 3. Korean Spiritual Line in Japanese. Unlike Germans, Japanese ruling party and their governments have never acknowledged what they did to Asian people while they invading Asian countries. Especially during the World War II, they made young Asian girls sex slaves for their soldiers. But they have never accepted such bad history and never educated their people about it. How poor the historically uneducated Japanese people. Late in the 16th century, they invaded Korea 2 times in big war scales, but the Koreans resisted them hard and finally protected their country. However, since the beginning of the 19th century, Korea's ruling class, including King's family, had been rotten and they just were collapsed themselves. While Korean people organized a lot of resistance groups against Japanese imperialists, the Korea's ruling class then just sold out their regime to Japanese imperialists. Finally, in 1910, Japan colonized Korea and they were also afraid of Korean people's resistant energy, so that they built their Governor-General building on a very crucial spot in Seoul. According to Yin and Yang theory, from the mountain Gwanak to the mountain Bugak, there is a Korean spiritual energy streaming. For more than 500 years before Korea was occupied by Japan in 1910, there was a main palace of Korea on the spiritual line, and even since the liberation from Japan, Korean presidential building has been on the line tightly close to the mountain Bugak. Korean Confucian ruling party and modern ruling parties just wanted such a spiritual energy to come to the palace or presidential building smoothly. But during the Japanese occupation time, Japan just wanted to cut off the Korean spiritual line, and they built up a huge and heavy building of Governor General on the spiritual line. For many years, even after Korea was liberated from Japan, the Japanese Governor General building has been used as a government office because the US military government of Korea just allowed Korean officials who worked for Japan to work again for the US military government of Korea after they won the World War II. Yes, South Korea has been ruled by America for about 3 years after Japan was defeated by America. For such 3 years, the American military government of Korea hired the Korean national traders as their servants, as done by Japanese imperialists. In the modern period, South Korea was ruled by military dictatorship for several decades. Under such a period, Korean people who resisted Japan and America had also fought against the military dictatorship, and finally they got a civilian government. In 1993, the civilian government disassembled the Japanese Governor General building, aiming at the recovery of Korean national spiritual energy. Now in 2022, the current Korean government seems to be Japanese friendly, and they seem to try to restore the Japanese Governor General building on its original position, that means on the Korean spiritual line. Like many other capitalist countries, the mainstream mass media are also a part of the ruling class in South Korea. Like in Brazil, the Korean mainstream mass media also try to hold every Democrat and nation-focused government and helped just national traders group who were just the Japanese side or American side depending on power change. In 2022 now, the current Korean government seems to sell out Korea to Japan and America again as did their fathers and their great-grandfathers. By the way, if we want to see where the Korean spiritual line is, please leave your comment and then I'll be together with you for the line.